What's up, everyone? Welcome into the All-22 NFL podcast. It is the official podcast of the All-22 fantasy football platform, the only fantasy football game with full 53-man rosters, including offensive linemen, where you get to choose personnel packages and have access to PFF grading and advanced stats to make decisions each week. Ray, did you hear the Jacksonville Jaguars GM rip a fart last night?
What? No, why would I have heard that? No.
Yeah, he was in an interview, mid-sentence, rips one, says sorry, and just keeps going. Didn't even blush.
He acknowledged it. He apologized.
He did.
Never apologize.
Wow.
Never apologize.
You're in a room full of people. It's tight. You have a diet of broccoli and ketchup.
Hold it. That's pretty much my son's diet. So, I mean, yeah. After a certain point, you can't apologize. He doesn't apologize. So, why change?
True. All right. Well, anyway, we are finished with reviewing each position, and now it's kind of time to get into the big board. You have up here the top of the big board. I thought we would go the other way, save some of the dramatics.
Oh, let's go the other way.
No, I mean, it's
nobody. They weren't paying. They didn't see that. Don't worry.
All right. We're going to start with the end of our big board, which is we each did 50, right? I think in an all-22 draft, right? If you're in a 12-team league, times 7 rounds, what is that? 84 picks. 84 picks, right? So we went to 50. All right. When the draft is done and we actually know what teams these players will be on, we will reconfigure this and maybe we'll get to that 84 number. Do you think you have it in you?
Oh, this 50 is brutal enough. But 84 is probably a lot easier when you know what teams these guys are on and what things look like. So
exactly.
And yeah, it's no problem. We do it for the people.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter what I think.
So it's a lot of information to get through just in conversation, right? So I think what we should do is just read out maybe your 15, right? So 50 to 36. I'll read out mine. There's obviously going to be some really big differences. There might be some guys on your list that aren't even on my list and, the opposite. So we'll kind of maybe discuss that, why some guys made your list, why some guys made mine. And then, we'll just have a discussion. So why don't you kick it off?
Yeah, so 50 is Kyrie Jackson, the corner out of Oregon, big, tall corner. And then just going up 49, Blake Fisher, the tackle out of Notre Dame. Then you got Roman Wilson at 48, Xavier Legette, wide receiver out of South Carolina, Keon Coleman, wide receiver out of FSU, TJ Tampa, the corner out of Iowa State, Jonathan Brooks, the running back out of Texas at 44, Michael Hall Jr., defensive interior player out of Ohio State at 43. Malachi Corley at 42. And sometimes I still think that's a little too low, but we'll see how that ends up. Tavondre Sweat at 41. Darius Robinson at 40 I'm considering him a defensive interior player. Jordan Morgan, 39, who I'm considering a guard and would be, I think, my only guard in the top 50. Depends on how people view Fautanu, which we'll get to later. But in my rankings, the only guard in my top 50 is Jordan Morgan. Wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall at 38, Peyton Wilson at 37, and Kingsley Suamatea at 36, offensive tackle, BYU.
Okay. All right. So mine, Brendan Fisk at 50, Peyton Wilson at 49, Jalen Wright at 48, Chris Jenkins at 47, Xavier Legette at 46, Braylon Trice at 45, Brandon Dorlus at 44, 43 is Darius Robinson, 42, Keon Coleman, 41, Tyler Nubin, 40, Tyler Guyton, 39, Cooper Beebe, 38, Quinyon Mitchell, 37, Brian Thomas Jr., 36, Jordan Morgan. So couple things stand out to me. One, obviously, you kind of called it out, right? You said Jordan Morgan is your only guard that you're considering him a guard, but he's your only guard that you're including in your top 50. I have Cooper Beebe, the same spot as him with Jordan Morgan, a few spots above. So you did not include Cooper Beebe in your top 50.
No, he's in the 50s. I don't think he's all the way down to 60. I think Jordan Morgan a bit lighter on his feet. And if you're projecting them inside, that's my preference there. I think you could do a little bit more athletically with Morgan. BB is what he is, stout, powerful, but kind of got those heavy feet there on the inside. And I don't think that translates quite as well. And it's a bit more system or scheme landing spot dependent to where he gets drafted.
Okay. I mean, even before we should have jumped into this, we should have talked about how we formed our big board. So for me, This is if I were the GM in an all-22 draft, in the NFL draft, because those are honestly the same thing, right? We're making this as realistic as possible. If I'm the GM in an all-22 draft or an NFL draft, this is how the order of how I would select these players. That's for me how I did this, right? So me having Cooper Beebe at 39 means to me that I would select Cooper Beebe above name any of the guys after him, right? I think one that stands out to me is Peyton Wilson. You have at 37, I have at 49. That's a difference to me. I think, similar positional values as guard and linebacker. I have a higher grade on Beebe. He's above him. But did you make your board the same way I did?
Yeah, taking positional value into account, which again is important. Obviously, we're seeing it in the NFL draft, but then also in all-22, which reflects that, right? Our scoring is based off of A, your performance and your grading, but then B, your positional value. So the premium positions have a higher impact. We're seeing the NFL chase those premium positions in the NFL draft. The same thing is going to be true in your all-22 rookie draft or startup draft. So we talk about, for example, again, we're not necessarily jumping ahead. This is just more so for background information, right? This tackle class is insanely good. Everybody loves this tackle class. By pick 45, they're all gone. They're all gone. This is a great tackle class, but if you wait till the second round and the back half of the second round, you are wiped out already, because no one's going to let those guys hang around because it's a premium position and it's so hard to find guys that can move at that size. They're too important to let hang around. So even though it's the greatest tackle class we've seen in years, they're all going to be gone by early day 2. So that's because of that positional value that's placed on these players. So the same thing applies in all-22. So yes, positional value takes effect. It's not necessarily just who I think is a better player. I may think that Tyler Nubin is a better safety than Cooper Beebe is as a guard, but offensive lineman, a little more positional scarce, right? Less good guards to go around, bit higher value. So you might have him above him, right? I'm not saying that that's your thought process, but I'm saying that's a part of it, right? It's not necessarily who's the very best. Jonathan Brooks is probably a better running back, in my opinion, than Kingsley Suamataia is as a tackle. But the tackle is way more important in that situation, right? So you're going to try to adjust your tackle first. So that's, again, what goes into it. It's not just straight who's the very best. Positional value also plays a part, just like it does in the NFL.
Right. Exactly. So it's funny you went to running backs, and I'm going to talk about it for like 2 seconds because we each have one running back on our top 50 list. One. And I kind of changed my tune a little bit. I went with Jalen Wright as my number 1 guy. You have Jonathan Brooks. And the legitimate reason why I made that switch between the two is because of the injuries with Brooks. And if I'm drafting a running back, there's a really good chance I'm only keeping him for his rookie contract, and I'm not going to pay him his second contract. I don't want a year of that contract to not be good. That's a fourth of the time that he's going to be on my team is him not at his best. And I think Jalen Wright's explosiveness is special, right? Like he is a special explosive athlete. So that's legitimately the only reason I made that switch. And I think those two guys are actually pretty close in my mind.
Yeah, they're closer than it appears. So for example, Jonathan Brooks, 44, and then there's no other running backs in the next 6 picks, but him and Benson, just because he was more complete, is probably my second. Way closer than it would appear by just looking at the listing of rankings. I did try to downplay or not consider too much the knee injury, only because it's not something like Peyton Wilson, for example. I think there's not 36 players better than him in this class, but because his injury history is a concern and the medicals are a concern moving forward, that has teams worried. I discount him a bit because of something like that. Whereas with Brooks, the scuttlebutt, again, based off of what we know and kind of understand, it's just the one knee injury, which is bad. I mean, I'm normally stay away from knee injury guy, but it's not something that's chronic or people think is an issue 3 years from now or 2 years from now. So it depends on your school of thought. Like you said, running backs, first contract, you're not trying to sign them to a second deal. So any injury pretty much eats into that timeline. So you're devaluing him. It's at that point, it's what's your philosophy as a general manager, which I think is what you see play out in, again, both all-22 and in the NFL.
Right. And regrettably, there were players on your list that I didn't get to watch that much film on. And those guys like Blake Fisher from Notre Dame, TJ Tampa, I saw a little bit, Michael Hall Jr., I didn't see at all. Like those three guys in particular are not on my list because simply I just didn't have the opportunity to watch them. So I guess high level, what did you love about those guys that made them get on there?
So I'll start with Michael Hall. People don't talk about him enough because JT Tuimoloau gets all the pub on Ohio State's defensive line. Michael Hall was more disruptive, right? He's not the prototypical size. I guess I think he's just under 300 pounds, but just a great athlete who just consistently provides pressure and does his job on the interior. And he's got some real juice in his legs. I love the way he gets off the ball. He's light on his feet. He's athletic. There's no real cons that I have. Like you talked about the listing yesterday of positives and negatives. When you go to the pros and cons, my cons for him are, okay, he's not the prototypical size. He's not 320 pounds. Okay, I'm not drafting every defensive lineman to be 320 pounds. There's a place for that, right? For my one tech, my run stuffers, what have you. But for a disruptive three technique, for example, Michael Hall's got it all. So I think he's a very good player, consistently disruptive, and just wasn't talked about enough because of the name and star power elsewhere on Ohio State. But he's a very good player. TJ Tampa, I like the size, I like the length. He's a bit rough around the edges as a corner as well. Sometimes can get a little caught in his transitions, but is really good in press, which again is kind of the key to my heart. So love that as well. Physical player. I think you have tools to work with there. I don't think he's quite got the upside of someone like a Tariq Woolen, for example, but a lot of those same tools are there. You can kind of say the same for someone like Kyrie Jackson, for example. And then Blake Fisher, Joe Alt gets all the pub, and you could say rightfully so. Yeah, sure. But Blake Fisher in his own right, I think he's a smooth mover. He's got good length and size as well. He's not quite as light-footed as some others and is sometimes late off the ball. He doesn't necessarily snap back into his stance or anything, and that kind of keeps him down a peg. But otherwise, he's a smooth mover and just an all-around good player with good size and good traits. Nothing exceptional. But again, if we talked about the strength of this tackle class, I think if you're ever wiped out of those first-round players, out of those top 6 or what have you tackles, Blake Fisher's not a bad fallback plan as a right tackle in this league, for example. So, and I think after him is where you see a real drop off. He's like the last starter quality player, I think, at that position, or at least that doesn't need extensive development work.
Right. And I think that says a lot because I went through and I saw that you had 9 offensive tackles in your top 50, and Blake Fisher being the last one means that you have 9 guys with starting level grades at tackle, right? For context, there are 64 starting spots in the NFL at tackle, which means that there is a really nice influx of starting level offensive tackles in this draft. I think it is a strength, and I think most teams should jump on that. Like most teams need enough upgraded tackle, right? So I could see that being a position that most teams try to attack early. I love that you have Suma Atea on your list.
Suma Atea.
I loved his film. He just missed my list for me. But I do think you're a complete coward for having Ricky Pearsall as low as you do. Quinyon Mitchell.
You're probably right. You're probably right.
You're a huge coward.
I can't argue with you.
Quinyon Mitchell for me is the guy that I think I was much lower than others on in my list.
I feel like I beat him up in our film session and you were like nicer to him. So I was a bit surprised to see him this low for you.
Well, because I think he's a good football player, and I think it just goes to show the strength of this class. And we're going to get into kind of where we think the first round talent ends on our list. But in my mind, we're looking right now at the other end of it, which is guys that are borderline end of first, early second round picks, I think is a really large group. I think that's a really large group. And I think it goes all the way to Tyler Guyton at 40 for me, or maybe even Tyler Nubin at 41. In my mind, like in most years, there are guys that spill over into the second round where you're like, man, I wish my team would have taken that guy in the first. Like that guy's awesome. I think last year, right, we talked about the Steelers, Joey Porter Jr., right, getting picked in the, technically the second round. That happens every year where there's guys like that fall in the second round, and you're like, that's an easy starter for a team. I think this year the draft is so deep that we're actually getting to about 41 from me, where I'm saying those are guys that are borderline first round picks. I'm not saying they are, but borderline first round picks. That takes you all the way to, the early middle part of the second round. So it means like 9 or 10 teams are going to get first round talent in the second round. So I really like that. I think another interesting thing to note just on this slide is that we have a lot of the receivers in kind of the same place towards the end, right? Xavier Legette, Keon Coleman. We have those guys in the same world. Obviously, you have Malachi Corley. I don't have him on my list. I liked him. I didn't love him. You mentioned that you think you actually might be too low on him. So that's interesting. Maybe I need to go back and watch him again. But yeah, I mean, I think this is pretty good. Any other comments for you before we go look at the next group of guys?
I'm surprised you have Braylon Trice that high. I thought you didn't like him. Well, actually, you probably weren't. You were again. You were nicer to him than I was. He's not on my top 50 list at all. So that's one difference there. The thing with Malachi Corley, I'll just say, and then I'll let you talk. Well, go ahead if you had something to say about Trice.
Yeah, well, I think one thing if you had seen our film breakdown of Braylon Trice, he was constantly in the backfield. He was constantly getting his hands on the quarterback. So there's something to that, right? Like he obviously has the talent to do those things. It's just finishing plays is where I really saw him struggle. I think that can be cleaned up. I think that can be cleaned up with some weight room sessions, right? Like I don't know Washington's weight program, but maybe it's not as good as others.
Probably really good, but I don't know.
But maybe not as good as others, right? Like, like we talk about Penn State is a really good one. So I think, again, I just think some of that can be cleaned up. Again, we were breaking down his film against Caleb Williams as well. Probably one of the slipperiest cornerbacks that we've seen in recent years. I like a lot of things about his game, including the fact that he's constantly just putting himself in the right position to be successful. Whether or not he is a different story.
Cool. Sure. Malachi Corley, last thing before we move on. The thing about him is that if you put Malik Neighbors aside, Malachi Corley is the very best in this draft class at yards after catch. If it wasn't for Malik Neighbors, he would top the list in that category. And in today's NFL, I feel like that is so valuable and so important if he goes to the right place that, I mean, he could be a star. So yeah, he's built like a running back. He runs like a running back after the catch. If he goes to the 49ers, I quit. So it's just one of those deals where he could really ascend again, if someone uses him properly, because I'm the trades chaser. And if you're best in class at something, that's going to catch my attention.
All right. Okay. So that's not the receiver I like. And if you remember last year when the Packers drafted Reed in the second round, I was pretty upset because in my mind, those players really need to be schemed open a lot of times to get the yak that happens after the catch. They're not just naturally going to get themselves open a lot of times. I think the Packers did a phenomenal job doing that with Reed this year. And you're right, it's kind of situational based. If he goes to the right place, it could be fantastic and he can look like that kind of a player. But that's just not my type of receiver. I want a guy that could create on his own more than a guy that just gets yards after the catch. But okay, let's go to the next slide. Read me your next group.
All right, 35 and up here. So 35, Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker, Texas A&M. 34, Michael Penix Jr. 33, Ladd McConkey. 32, Tyler Guyton, the tackle out of Oklahoma. 31, Zach Frazier, center from West Virginia. 30, Adonai Mitchell. Cooper DeJean at 29, Xavier Worthy 28, 27, Tyler Nubin, 26, J.J. McCarthy, 25, Nate Wiggins, 24, Quinyon Mitchell, 23, Brian Thomas Jr., 22, Jared Verse, and 21, Jackson Powers Johnson, the center from Oregon.
Okay, so my 35 was Jermaine Burton, 34, Michael Penix Jr., same as you, crazy enough. 33, Bo Nix, 32, Chop Robinson, 31, Terrion Arnold, 30, Jersey Newton, 29, Nate Wiggins, 28, Ricky Pearsall, 27, Graham Barton, 26, Tavondre Sweat, 25, Zach Frazier, 24, Cooper DeJean, 23, Ladd McConkey, 22, Amarius Mims, 21, Lautai Latu. So a lot of interesting things now when we get to this group. This is where the conversation really gets kind of different. Our views differ pretty dramatically. Bo Nix is not on your list at all, right? Jermaine Burton is not on your list at all.
I like Jermaine Burton. The reason he's not on my list is because of some off-field stuff. So I similar to like injuries and stuff, it's like, how much do I take that into account? With Jermaine Burton, the scuttlebutt there is kind of enough that I dropped him. He would have been in my 40s. So I still wouldn't have had him quite as high as you did, but I do like him quite a bit, talent-wise, and he would have been in my 40s.
Okay. Graham Barton, I don't believe is on your list at all.
Yeah, he is. Just not yet.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So you have him as a tackle then? Or a center?
No, center.
Oh,
Center.
Okay. All right,
Yeah.
Cool. I did not have Edgerrin Cooper on my list. I have him as my 53rd. He just missed my list. So you were obviously almost 18 spots higher on him than I am. That's a pretty big difference. Obviously, there are things to like about his game. We talked about how explosive he is. It's just the linebacker position being, as kind of volatile as it is in one aspect. And then two, a player that kind of plays out of control a lot of times, doesn't necessarily see things as well as NFL linebackers need to see things. I obviously like the aggression, but for me, it just wasn't enough. Couple other things, obviously, to note. I think you're too low. Again, you're a coward on Ladd McConkey. What else? Tyler Nubin.
Just outside the first round. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're obviously, I think, a lot higher than me on Tyler Nubin. You have him at 27. Quinyon Mitchell, obviously, a lot higher than me as well. What else? Jared Verse. I think you're too low on him, but we're not super far apart just because he's obviously on the next slide. What else here?
So you have not yet placed Adonai Mitchell. So he's in your top 20?
He is in my top 20. Yes.
Okay. All right. So then we'll hold on that one. Bo Nix. Tell me about Bo Nix. You have him above Penix. He's 33rd. Mm-hmm. Tell me about him.
I had a really hard time with Nix and Penix, and I actually had Penix in that spot from the beginning. I had Bo Nix around 25 originally, and I moved him down to be right with Michael Penix. Bo Nix, to me, in the right situation, could be a good NFL quarterback. In anything but that, he can probably be out of the league in 3 years, and he's also a much older prospect, which is concerning. But I think there needs to be a point, and we'll talk about this when we get higher up the draft board as well. I think there needs to be a point where you're saying, at what point in the draft am I taking a risk on the quarterback that I think has some potential over a player, right? You talked about Jermaine Burton has a ton of off-the-field issues, good football player, but is he more valuable to me than a potential starting quarterback? Absolutely not, right? And I think that there has to be a line in the sand where you're going, yes, I'd much rather have Arnold, Newton, Wiggins. Those guys to me are surefire starters in the NFL. I think they could be really good football players. I think Chop Robinson being at an important position has a lot of really promising traits. Probably is right there on that line to me. After that, all of the other guys that we've talked about already, in my opinion, I'd rather take a shot on a starting quarterback than just another guy that's maybe a questionably rotational player on my team and maybe not a surefire starter, right? So to me, I think you need to have a point where you're saying that's the case. I'd rather take that risk than just have another body on my team. And it obviously is going to make a huge difference based on what your team needs are, right? If you don't need a quarterback, you'll never have Bo Nix or Michael Penix there. But if you do have a needed quarterback, and maybe like the Giants, I think they're a great example of this. If they're picking at 6 and you're telling me I either need to trade a ton of picks to move up to 3 to get with the guy that I want, or I can build up my team by drafting Malik Neighbors at 6 and then getting Bo Nix at the turn of the second round, to me, that's a better strategy, right? Because I do think Bo Nix could be a starter in the NFL. He could also end up not being a starter in the NFL, and you just spent a second round pick. That doesn't kill your team, right? I think that's kind of the conversation that needs to happen. I think putting those two guys together, there's an obvious trend, right? It's age. They're both much older prospects that, 2 years ago, we weren't talking about as NFL talent. And I think that, when you go back 2 years, they're 22. They're still maybe the oldest players at the quarterback position that we're talking about in this draft. So if I'm going 2 years and comparing them to their peers, I don't think necessarily they're that level of prospect. So I do think that they need to be pushed down the list. And I think 33, 34 is right about where I have them.
So this seems to me like something that can change greatly depending on where they end up, where they actually get drafted. When we do post-draft rankings, landing spot could determine what separates Bo Nix and Michael Penix. Yeah, I kind of have them right next to each other here. And it's like a styles makes fights things right now, right? Different styles of quarterbacks as far as Nix getting the ball out quickly and efficiently and all the screens and all that other stuff, and kind of extending plays a bit more freelance than Michael Penix, who's more sort of down the field, can move around and just never really did. So your explanation is essentially why I had JJ McCarthy at 26. He is not, in my opinion, the 26th best overall player in this class. He is just not. Straight up, Zach Frazier is a better center than JJ McCarthy is as a quarterback, in my opinion. I don't think it's particularly close. But again, when you get into positional value, I kind of slotted the quarterback with some upside and potential ahead of positional players. Once I got to the point of, okay, these players, I like them. They have some things that are some quality traits here that I can maybe unlock, but there's some holes in their game. Once I kind of started to reach that point, that's where I put my quarterback that I don't consider at all a surefire type of deal, but potentially worth taking a shot on in the aggregate. And that's why McCarthy falls at 26 for me in this spot here. So similar thought process. It's just kind of how you view and evaluate these quarterbacks. And I think once we get to the upper stages of our rankings here, we'll talk more about sort of the class and how it kind of all comes together. But I get the explanation. So I'm in line with that line of thought. Just again, kind of the difference in how we slot them.
For sure. And just kind of sticking with JJ McCarthy, I understand why you would have him where you have him, and I think it's your prerogative to do so. Obviously, you haven't seen him yet on my list. He is higher on mine. I think that the difference between him and a Nix and a Penix is bigger than what you have here, right? And I think that it's the age. He was basically a really solid starter from the moment he entered college at, what was it, like 18, 19 years old. He's still super young. I understand he had a ton of talent around him at Michigan, but he did lead a team to a national championship. I do think that matters. You want a leader. Does he have that in him? I think, teams will have to figure that out when they do interviews. Washington might have him leading a team in bowling or something with like 40 other prospects, but that's their job to figure out, is this guy legitimately a leader? Does he have that difference maker in him? And to be honest, I think that's why I moved Bo Nix back to being close to Michael Penix, because I think Michael Penix has that too, right? There's leadership qualities in Penix that allowed him to take that, it was a really good Washington team, but take it to a really high level, getting them into that national championship game that Bo Nix doesn't have on his resume, right? After starting more games than anybody in college history. I think that's why I put them closer. But if I was just judging them on the film, I think Bo Nix's game is a lot cleaner than Michael Penix's is, right? So that's the quarterback conversation is super difficult. It's so difficult. And you're right. When we find out where these guys go, Michael Penix goes 13 or whatever to Vegas, and he's a Raider, and Bo Nix goes, I don't know, second round to the Broncos. Yeah, Michael Penix is going to rise up my draft board. Bo Nix is going to fall pretty hard. So we're going to have to wait to see that. Xavier Worthy, another guy, I think you're a coward. You have to have that guy higher than that. Any other notable things for you on the list?
So do you have Brian Thomas higher, or did I just miss him before?
I believe I have him higher. No, you missed him. I have him at 37.
Okay, missed him. Okay. I'm going out on a limb. I'm not being a coward, Brian Thomas Jr. That's me going out on a limb, because I have the same concerns you have about him. So there's that. I'm picking and choosing my spots here. Okay. That's all I'm doing. We could go back and forth with these quarterbacks for forever. We really could. I could sit here and start talking about all these things that we list with JJ McCarthy. None of them say to me, well, how does that help him complete multiple 3rd and 8 and 3rd and 9 passes in an NFL game, in a single NFL game, that aren't strictly crossing routes and over routes that your completely dominant offensive line gives you the time for versus an outmatched inferior opponent. So there's that. And then you will say something, and I'll say something.
I'm going to respond to it
for 5 hours.
I'm going to respond to it because I think that NFL teams are going to look at that situation and it's relatable. Like you talk about what Bryce Young had to deal with last year in Carolina, right? Like everything stunk. But there were teams like, for example, maybe a better example is the Giants, right? The offensive line is bad, but there are good pieces on it. If you insert JJ McCarthy, the receiving situation isn't much different, right? The offensive line was better in Michigan, but it's not like he had, like, that's the difference between him and Michael Penix for me, right? Like, you're talking about situation, and Michael Penix had potentially 2 first-round receivers and a second-round receiver on his team. Like, it doesn't get better than that. And he also had a really good offensive line.
Yeah, but he drove the bus. He drove the bus. McCarthy was a passenger.
I saw some of the deep throws that Michael Penix did, and his just like chuck it and pray strategy with Rome Odunze and other guys. I don't know if that's driving the bus, right? Like, to me, that's you have a really good situation. It's like being the point guard when you have Michael Jordan on your team. It's like, yeah, just get the ball to Michael Jordan and he'll probably do something good with it.
Sure. Or McCarthy just hands it to on an off-ball screen to Michael Jordan and then just watches him do the rest too. I'm not seeing the difference here, but strategy again.
All right, we could talk about it forever. Let's move up.
Let's do it.
The next group of guys. Read yours off.
All right, we're going now from the top 20. So 20th, I have J.C. Latham, tackle, and I want to be clear about him being a tackle. There is some talk about him potentially being a guard. That is a tackle to me all the way, and I think also a potential left tackle. A lot of the discussion around him is right tackle or elite guard. I could see Latham as a left tackle. In any event, 20, Latham. 19, Terrion Arnold. Both Bama guys there. 18th is Laiatu Latu. 17th, Kool-Aid McKinstry. 16th is Troy Fa'utanu. Again, I'll say as tackle, but I totally understand if someone drafts him and slots him inside to guard, but he's a tackle for me. Chop Robinson, I have at 15th. I have Amarius Mims at 14th. Jerzon Newton, the defensive interior out of Illinois, is 13th for me. And then Byron Murphy at 12, the defensive interior out of Texas. Talisi Fuaga at 11. Brock Bowers at 10. Ninth, I have Dallas Turner. 8th, Jaden Daniels. 7th, Drake May. And 6th, Rome Odunze.
I have a few things to say on yours, but we'll get to that.
I'm sure you do.
So I have Kool-Aid at 20. I have Adonai Mitchell at 19. Jared Verse at 18. Brock Bowers at 17. Troy Fa'utanu at 16. Jackson Powers Johnson at 15. Xavier Worthy at 14. J.C. Latham, tackle at 13. Talise Fuanga at 12. J.J. McCarthy at 11. Dallas Turner at 10. Rome at 9. Byron Murphy at 8. Jaden Daniels at 7. And Olu Fashanu at 6. There's a lot to unpack here, Ray. There's a ton. I'm going to start light, right, towards the bottom of the list. You had J.C. Latham. I think you're a little low on him, but I get it. We're only 7 spots apart. I agree with you. I think he could be a dominant left tackle in the NFL. To me, that's like as valuable of a thing as you can have besides quarterback and maybe edge rusher, right? So to me, I think just from a value perspective, I have to have him a little higher than that. Cornerback, I think the conversation, one thing we've learned playing all 22 and making all 22 is cornerbacks just super, like every year is going to be a different story, right? You might have Terrion Arnold being the highest graded corner in 2024. And then the next year he might be the 40th highest graded corner because I don't know, he tweaked his hip and all of a sudden it's just a bad year, right? It turns into a bad year. That legitimately happens with corners. So for me, I'm a little, you're going to see like kind of my list, right? The corners are basically already gone. Kool-Aid being my highest graded one at 20. I just have a really hard time investing top 20 picks in a position that is super volatile and where there's really not an elite one in this draft over guys like J.C. Latham, who I think could be very, very promising tackles in the NFL.
Yeah, I think we differ slightly there. Your second half of that was key in that, and there's not an elite one in this class. To me, I'm investing in if I believe one is elite because of how volatile it is. If I could find one that I think is not a volatile player and is going to be consistently great, like Patrick Surtain, I'm taking that every time. There's just not that guy in this class. So yeah, your top corner is at 20. Mine is at 7. It's the same guy, which again is kind of shocking because most people do not have Kool-Aid as their number one corner, and we both do. And for me, my top corner is at 17. And I feel like in most classes, my number one corner will be higher than 17th. But that's just, again, with how top heavy, not even top heavy, just how good this class is on offense in the top 15 or so. And then some, premium, in my opinion, defensive players mixed in there. Corner doesn't have that top level flag carrier, so it drops down a little bit there. But yeah, for the most part, we're in line, right? My number one corner, 17, yours is at 20. So go ahead. I know you got a lot of takes.
Yeah, no, for sure. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to hear what you had to say. Obviously, Chop, we're pretty different on that. I had him at 32, I believe, 32, and you have him at 15. You talked about him at nauseum. He's a Penn State guy. I really don't want to hear your takes on him, to be quite honest.
You're going to hear him. He's got the best first step in this class, the most explosive first step anyone over 250 pounds ever had. And it is clear on tape. And he is stronger than you think. I know Chris wanted to go ahead and show that play. He got concussed. Chris is a jerk. Showed the game he got injured in our film session. But in any event, Chop he's being overanalyzed right now.
Okay. The real thing that I wanted to talk about with these rankings, right, is you have Brock Bowers at 10, which means to me that you have a tight end in the top 10 of your draft. That must mean to me that you think he is an elite player. I have him at 17, so not super far down, but far enough down where, again, Fautanu, Powers Johnson, Worthy, Latham, Fuanga, McCarthy, like those guys are ahead of him. How do you justify taking the tight end above those guys? And do you see him being a successful traditional NFL tight end, or are you putting him there because you think he's a slot receiver?
He's not a traditional tight end. And this is so tough. And what's weird about this might not make sense to people, but it makes sense to me. I have Bowers at 10. I have Newton at 13. I went back and forth about literally just flipping him and having Newton at 10 and Bowers at 13 and then leaving like 11 and 12 the same. You're like, well, how does that make any sense with the way you stack them? It goes back a little bit to what I said before when we were talking about quarterbacks in the 20s and where you kind of slot them in when you don't necessarily think they're surefire top 25 players in the class or something, right? But you're going to slide them in around there because of the positional value, and you're starting to get into positional players that have some holes. To a lesser extent, I think this is like a mini tier where obviously these prospects are fantastic, but they have just a couple of holes or questions, right? Fuaga, there were some times he gave up the corner a little bit too easily. And, road grading tackles, that's fantastic. But you know what? 3rd and 9, that doesn't mean squat, okay? I don't need you to be a road grader on 3rd and 9. I need you to keep me clean, set the edge and hold your ground, get to your spot and not get beat. Got beat a little too easily at times around the corner. So that scares me a bit. Byron Murphy, you're playing next to a guy like T'Vondre Sweat. Your tape looks good. You don't have prototype size. So if you go into a situation where you don't have someone to make up for that shortcoming right next to you, alongside you, is there an adjustment period there? Whereas Jerzon Newton, I'm like, I know exactly what you are and exactly what you're going to be. So how exactly do I play that out? It's like a mini tier where you could slot them in any order, and I wouldn't necessarily argue with you. But with Bowers, I don't think there's the holes in his game are known. He's not a prototypical inline blocking guy that's just going to dominate, but he is unique. He can change the game, even if I think we both agree that some of the game breaker ability is a little bit overstated. It's not the physical type of ability as a Kyle Pitts. It's just not. Like, that was just a couple years ago, guys. Let's not forget. And so he's not that prototype built in a lab, but everything else is there. And it goes back also to scarcity. There's just not many players like him, period, in the NFL today or in the draft or probably in next year's class. So it's one of those where this is a rare player, right? It's a rare asset, rarer than a very good 3-technique defensive tackle, for example. So he's in that mini tier. I have him slotted at 10, anywhere from, I think, 10 to 13. I could have put him in and it would have made sense and been fine with it. But I think because of that sort of scarcity and how unique he is as a player, I put him at 10.
Okay. And I could totally see like my 17 and 18. Those are the two that will really scare me because I think Bowers and Verse are both really special. I think they're both really, really special college players. I don't know if Bowers is going to be a really special NFL player. I think it's very much going to depend on where he goes. I think Verse could be. I definitely fear, it took him an extra couple of years to do it. He's a little bit older than some of the other guys. That worries me a little. But I also could see him stepping into a role in the right situation and being a legitimate top 10 edge rusher in the NFL like tomorrow. I could see that happening based on the film that I watched. I did miss something that I want to talk about. Can you go back to the last slide? So I wanted to point out here that for me, pick 22, which is Amarius Mims, is where I have the end of my surefire first round guys. So I talked about how the other side of that was 41 Tyler Nubin. I have almost 20 guys in that borderline first round, early second round area. But I think that there are legitimately in this draft 22 guys I feel very, very, very confident taking in the first round. And I was curious where that breaking point was for you.
It's 21.
Oh.
And it may be 20. The reason that Jackson Powers Johnson is at 21 at the very end of that is because of the medical whispers and concerns that people have about his health moving forward. It's the only reason why. Otherwise, he would be higher on this list. Probably, again, just eyeballing it, probably 16th, right above Fautanu. I think if there weren't those questions about his health. And then outside of that, yeah, anybody after, I don't consider Verse that surefire first round, like no brainer type of talent. If I'm on an island with that, so be it. I think actually, my guy, oh my gosh, there's someone that I actually have a very high opinion of who shares this opinion of Verse that as I do, and I'm completely blanking on him. So I'm just gonna probably shout it out like 5 minutes from now as we're going through this. But yeah, I don't consider Verse that surefire first round type of player. Neither, same goes for Brian Thomas Jr. or Quinyon Mitchell or any of those names below it. So my cutoff is Jackson Powers Johnson, who is only at the bottom of that tier because of health concerns.
So Amarius Mims was that point in the dirt for me. I have him as a surefire first round guy. And I think that it's because of the position, right? He's a tackle and he does enough things well that he's jumping that border for me. But I definitely still have concerns with his tape. And you have him at 14 above your love child, Chop Robinson. So just kind of curious, like, what did you see that made you so confident to push him that far up your board?
8 games played or 8 games started doesn't scare me. Not when they look good. And he's got the best frame maybe ever of an offensive tackle. Like literally it might be the best frame ever. I think it's better than Tyron Smith's frame, really, all things considered. He's a young player who I don't think has bad habits. I think he has no habits, which is good. And when you put on the tape and you watch him just completely just neutralize JT Tuimoloau out in the college football playoff. And I don't know if that's like his first start or third or what have you, but as a super young player who's inexperienced and at the highest stage, he's just shutting down this guy. I think he has all the tools and traits in the world. Now, that doesn't mean he doesn't have high bust potential, but the reason I think he has high bust potential isn't because he's inexperienced and whatever else. I think there's some injury concerns there as well that people aren't talking about. All the noise at the combine was about his frame and all of his measurements. Okay, but he got hurt running the 40. So now this is a guy who had an injury and then got hurt at the combine again. It's like, can this guy stay healthy? We're not really sure because he hasn't had a sustained run of playing time in his college career before actually declaring pro. So that's my concern, is this might be a guy whose body doesn't hold up. And we just haven't seen it yet because he hasn't had enough tread on his tires for that to really show. That's my concern. But putting that aside, because unlike someone like a Powers Johnson, for example, right? I don't think there's a condition that has a condition might be a really strong word. Let's just say injury or something that is concerning people moving forward. I have a bit of a concern as to how his body's going to hold up in the pros. But putting that aside, because that's more of a question mark than something that he's shown me, it's the best frame with great athleticism. Okay. We pay these coaches mid 6 figures for a reason, All right. What am I paying you all this money for if you can't take this guy and make him good in a league where there aren't many good tackles? Like, to be the 25th best tackle in the NFL, you just have to be okay. You don't even have to be great. If you can't do that with this guy, then why are you even employed? So
yeah, no, I think
I
that's
got him
fair.
that high.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Those are good takes. Jackson Powers Johnson, the injury thing is interesting to me. And the reason I didn't let it really influence my projections here is just because like we hear it, but we have no idea what it is. Like, has anybody come out and said, this is what the injury is? This is why we're concerned. I haven't heard anything, right? It's just, so is it smoke, right? Like, I don't think we really know yet. So I'm going to hold my point there until we hear more. Dallas Turner made your top 10. And that's what I wanted to call you out on. Because when we had that Edge episode, you were like, yeah, he's good, but like he wouldn't be in my top 10.
Your top 10 too. What are you talking about? He's 10.
I said he would make my top 10. I called that out during the episode. So I wanted to call you out on it because you actually had him higher than I did. So you obviously like him. Tell me why he made your top 10.
Because once I stacked these guys, like, damn, I can't really put them above him. Like, I can't do it. Like, I just couldn't do it. I wanted to, but I couldn't justify someone like Bowers over him. And then Fuaga, I mentioned the concerns that I have there. And again, phenomenal player. I'm super high on him, but that giving up the corner just a little bit, like, I can't put him above someone like Turner, who at that premium position has that upside to be a top 6 type of edge rusher in the entire league. He's definitely not there yet, not close to there yet right now, but he's also not close to, like, there's some players that have traits that are not close to what their traits could signal as their ceiling, but that's just because they're just not that good at football. That's not Dallas Turner. He is good at football and also has these traits. So I don't know if it's just a matter of, I believe it's just a matter of kind of needing the reps to get there. And sometimes when you're in that assembly line at a place like Alabama, you don't have enough time in the oven to develop all of that before basically your name is called up. You go out there and dominate your third year in college. And then you say, well, I'm not going to leave, 8 figures on the table. I'm going to go pro. And so you leave as not quite a finished product, but still a very good football player with these traits. And I think that's Dallas Turner. So today, not a top 10 player in the class, right? If we were playing a football game tomorrow, but when you consider the upside, the positional value, and where he very realistically could be in just 2 or 3 years, I can't take 10 players over him in this class. I would have a little sinking feeling in the back of my head every night before going to sleep that I just passed up on something special potentially.
I'm in agreement. So just going back to the quarterback conversation, because JJ McCarthy, I have him at 11, right?
One thing I will say, actually, hold on, sorry. I think you called something out earlier, and I think you're right. I may not have slipped Graham Barton in here. He should be in here. And in looking at it, he would, I guess my bona fide firsts would be then 22 players, because he would slot in. Honestly, he's stacked with Jackson Powers Johnson. It's just a matter of medicals as to which one I would have higher. So I guess we have the same amount of first rounders. Okay.
All right, cool. Yeah, no, I appreciate you calling that out, because you made me look like a liar before. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, appreciate it.
Just continue. I'm not going to.
McCarthy at 11. It's the conversation I had before, right? And I don't need to talk about him too much, but it's, at what point is this, would I rather take the risk on the quarterback that's not as good of a football player as the other alternatives at other positions? And I think 11 made a lot of sense to me. Again, I probably have a second round grade on McCarthy, right? Like, in reality, he's a second round player, but I have him at 11 because if I'm a QB needy team and I'm sitting at 11, or I'm sitting at, say, 10, right? And it's Dallas Turner or JJ McCarthy. Maybe at that point I'm saying Dallas Turner is special enough at an important position where I'm taking Dallas Turner. But at 11, when Dallas Turner and those other guys are gone, if this is what I'm left with, I have to take McCarthy over a non-surefire wide receiver, a non-surefire, offensive tackle. Even though they're really good offensive tackles, am I going to take a starting level offensive tackle over what could be the potential to get quarterback right? right? Like to me, that's the point. I just looked at the names behind him and I said, I'm not taking a corner that's not an elite corner over what could be a promising quarterback, right? Like I really struggled with that conversation. We don't need to talk about it any more than that unless you want to.
I would just encourage people to watch the JJ McCarthy episode in particular, because again, we're doing a big board episode here. We're talking about 50 plus guys. I think between our lists, it's probably closer to 60. Watch the episode where we can dive deeper, because again, we don't want to spend too much time on just JJ McCarthy, but like I said, we can go back and forth for hours. So at least watch that episode, see where, okay, even when you take a look into the quote unquote, like good throws that were made, what's the timing look like? Does he layer throws, or are you just impressed by the fastballs and not necessarily registering that, hey, everything is a fastball and there is no layer of throws? And I think that's what eventually got us both to have him below the remaining quarterbacks on this list. And so if we want to go to that, I think let's talk about the quarterback class as a whole. I like to describe quarterback classes as, this is a blank quarterback class. This is a 2 quarterback class. This is a 3 quarterback class. This is a 5 quarterback class. I think this class in particular is closer to a 1 quarterback class than it is a 3 quarterback class. And I think ultimately 2 will hit, but no one else I would consider greater than 50-50 of being a hit, other than, of course, Caleb Williams, who I think is just special. I think we agree on that. But everyone else, I think there's a less than 50% chance they're a hit. They're all going to start and probably start for a couple years, but I don't think they're going to be legitimate hits. And I guess that's up to interpretation. Some people say, oh, well, he was the 15th best quarterback for 8 years. What did that get you? What does that normally get you, unless you have a revolutionary offensive coach that squeezes every ounce out of him and can make the Super Bowl with a Jimmy Garoppolo? Where does that truly get you? So my definition of a hit is a legitimate franchise quarterback that I could win a Super Bowl with. I think there's only one guy here. And I think everyone else has a less than 50% chance of being a top 8 to 10 quarterback for several years during their career. But based on the odds, perhaps one other one will do that.
That's so hard. And I understand what you're saying, and there's a lot I agree with, but let's talk about it, right? Because you have Drake May at 7, and no, let's stay on the other side.
Let's stay here. Yeah, let's do it.
You have Drake May at 7. You have Jalen Daniels at 8. I have Jalen Daniels at 7 and JJ McCarthy at 11. So like we have this group of quarterbacks in that range. And I get what you're saying, where it's, if I'm not getting a surefire thing, why am I taking him over other guys that could be elite players, right? But I think that while there's a good chance that maybe neither Jaden Daniels or Drake May or JJ McCarthy end up being an elite quarterback at the next level, I think starting with Jalen Daniels, I think he has a really high chance of being a good NFL quarterback. I think that that's kind of what teams are realizing, and I think that that's why maybe Washington is leaning towards taking him, because I think that there's a floor to his game that's still really good, right? And I kind of talked about how I have him, in reality, I think that there's a more likely chance he ends up as like bottom tier quarterback in the NFL. But I also think that there's a floor that he'll never be like truly bad. And I get what you're saying, that that's not necessarily good enough, but that floor is there for him, that I think a lot of teams are going to be licking their lips saying, okay, the floor's there. Now can we just raise that ceiling? Whereas Drake May, I think the ceiling is there, but the floor is probably really low. And that's so scary to most NFL teams. And I think that's why we're hearing this kind of chaos happening, where it's like, does JJ McCarthy go above Drake May? I think that's crazy. I think that's kind of crazy conversations to be having. But I do understand why a team would say, let me take Daniels over May, because I want the floor to at least be this high, right? So I kind of understand that. Where you have them is interesting to me, because yes, I would understand wanting a Rome Odunze on my football team, but there's no shot in hell that I'm taking what I have as a non-elite wide receiver over a shot of having an elite quarterback, right? And again, the odds of Rome being an elite receiver are significantly better than Drake May or Jaden Daniels being an elite quarterback. I have to take the risk on the quarterback. Have to, because I don't have an elite tag on Rome. Now go to the next slide, and I'll finish kind of my monologue here. But I do have an elite tag on Neighbors, Alt, and Harrison. Those are the three players besides Caleb Williams in this draft that, to me, are the elite of the elite when you're talking about draft prospects. What I mean by that is I think that very early in their careers, they will be making Pro Bowls, and depending on health, they are Hall of Fame caliber football players based on what I see of them as prospects. When you go through my All-22 era rankings and you see that E tag on players, most of those guys right now, you're saying in the first 5 years of their career, if injury didn't hit them, they're on a Hall of Fame trajectory, right? So like, I'm very particular about giving that tag to a player because I don't think every player has that. You have Olu Fashanu in your top 4. I don't know if you have that tag on him. I don't. But for me, those are the only players in this draft that I'm taking over the chance of taking a very promising quarterback in a Drake May or a Jaden Daniels. That's the conversation that I think most NFL teams are having right now. I think that's what the Patriots are kind of trying to figure out, right? I think Washington is set that they're taking quarterback. But if you're the Patriots, and I completely understand this, and it's kind of the conversation I'm trying to have with Giants fans as well, saying, you don't know what Drake May and Jaden Daniels are going to be, or JJ McCarthy. You don't know. Yes, it's important to take those risks and try to figure it out, but not at the, instead of taking what could be a Hall of Fame player and guys that I think could be Hall of Fame players in Marvin Harrison, Joe Alt, and Malik Neighbors. I have to take those guys first. But those are the only guys. After that, it's quarterbacks. So how do we differ on that?
I think a key factor here, and we're discussing it without saying it, is the premium position value. All of these players that we're discussing in between these quarterbacks on this list are at a premium position. We're talking about offensive tackles, wide receivers, and of course, the quarterback. To me, I don't necessarily need to have an elite tag on someone to supersede the premium that we place on the quarterback position, because someone like Olufashinu could be a tad under elite, can just be very good, and he's going to be a starting left tackle for 11 years. That is incredibly valuable. And if I am taking that and measuring that up against Jaden Daniels, who I think there is a good chance he's very bad. There's a good chance he's very bad. I got to be sold. I got to be sold on a quarterback, because if I'm not, it's probably your job either way at this point, because if you don't take a quarterback and then by the time you get one, that's just that's the conundrum with the NFL versus an all-22 manager, where you could take a little bit more of a holistic approach to building your team, where if you don't like the quarterbacks, you don't have to feel forced to taking one because you're trying to put food on the table for your family. As long as you just keep subscribing to All-22, you can continue building this team until you get it right. So shouts out to that. But I think that the difference is I don't necessarily need an elite tag on these guys, because I have someone like Rome Odunze, as you see, a little bit below Harrison and Neighbors, to where I don't think he's the elite tag, as you put it. I think he's just below that. But damn, he's incredibly good at a very impactful position, and he's special downfield. Not many guys can do what he does, and he can do it for, again, he could do that for 8 years for me. So am I going to pass that up on what I deem a 35 to 40% chance that a quarterback is a pretty good starter, and a 10% chance, 8% chance baked in there that he's great? I don't know. I can't do the math in my head, but based on positional values and the weights, that doesn't add up to me. That doesn't work out to me. So I keep the There's the elite players, and then there's the very good players at premium positions. And I think that second grouping, I still would place above the quarterbacks that I am not sold on. I think that's the difference.
Okay. I mean, I think it's a fair argument to have. And I think it totally depends on what you think of these quarterbacks, right? I think if we're looking at last year's draft class and having the same conversation, right? And I'm saying it's CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. I have CJ Stroud. I believe I placed him over Caleb Williams, right? So like I would take probably both CJ Stroud, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., Joe Walton, and Malik Neighbors, because I think that they have a very high chance of being good. Obviously, Bryce Young went to the worst possible situation in football. They did nothing to help him. I think he's going to look a lot better this year with the decisions they made. But regardless, and honestly, as a fantasy football manager, right, and we're drafting for our fantasy teams, we don't have a lot of control over that. And that's why this big board is going to change drastically after the draft when we know where these guys land, because that affects so much of this. But with what we know now, I think Drake May and Jaden Daniels are enough for me to take over some players, right? Not the 3 elite players that I have here, that guys that I think could be on a Hall of Fame trajectory if they stay healthy and keep, they don't create CTE ESPN, right? Like if they don't go that route, they could be really promising. Besides those guys, it's I have to go with these quarterbacks that I think are really good quarterbacks. I think it's the next tier that I would then agree with you, where it's Bo Nix and it's Michael Penix Jr. and it's Will Levis and it's those guys. I think at that point I say, yeah, there's a bunch of, I'd rather have the tackle for 10 years. I'd rather have even potentially some of the receivers. I'd rather have Brock Bowers. I'd rather have Dallas Turner and Byron Young. Not Byron Young. Other guys. Anyway, yeah, that's the conversation that I would start to have. I think that's where we're a little different. I think I'm probably a little higher than you, based on this conversation with a Drake May, with a Jaden Daniels, because I think that you just have to take those risks. Interesting thing. Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to ask you, what percentage would you put on either? So on one of Drake May or Jaden Daniels being a top 8 quarterback in the NFL, what percentage would you put that
on either one of them? Both of them. So I'm like, I'm kind of like, I have better odds.
One of.
15%.
15% between the two of them, and you're going to take them over Rome Odunze?
100%. Because Rome Odunze isn't changing my team in a way that, like, I think Malik Neighbors legitimately changes my team. He legitimately does. If Malik Neighbors goes to the Giants, he changes that team. I think the offensive line looks different with Malik Neighbors on that team. I think Daniel Jones looks legitimately different with Malik Neighbors on the team. I don't know if that's the case with Rome Odunze. I don't know that. I think there's a chance it all looks different, but I don't think it's nearly the same level as Harrison or Neighbors.
Like, I think doesn't change your team. Olufashu doesn't change your team. No. Being a starting tackle, because
I told you, I think that there's a chance.
Best pass blocker in this class at offensive tackle.
Because I told you, I think that there are a lot of Evan Neal things to Olu's game that concern me enough. I think he's a really good football player. I have him at 7, I think, or 6. Like, I really like Olu, but there are legitimately concerns. I think Joe Alt changes my team, and we obviously have those two guys flipped. I think Joe Alt changes my team enough because his floor is so high that I would love to plug him in and say, yeah, that's going to change my team more than taking a 15% chance of Drake May or Jaden Daniels being good.
I'm just trying to figure you out here, because you're talking about floors here. Like, Joe Alt's got this great floor, but you're telling me that you're gambling on guys that you think between the two of them have a 15% chance of hitting.
That's important.
That's riverboat stuff.
It's that important. But because you said top 8, if you ask me what are the odds that they're top 15, I'd say for one of them, I'd say it's probably 75%.
Top 15. Who's the 15th best quarterback in the league right now? Is it Baker Mayfield? Is that winning you anything?
It could. If you get him on the right year and you get him on the right team.
If you have players like Olufashu blocking for them and Rome Odunze catching for them, yeah, it could get you somewhere.
I'm going to say something really controversial, right?
Please
really
do.
controversial.
We're an hour in.
I apologize to Eagles fans out there. I love Jalen Hurts. Him on another team is not a top 15 quarterback.
No, not even close.
He might be a top 20, top 25. He's not top 15, but we have him on the Eagles, and he's top 10 because of it. If you insert Drake May or Jaden Daniels on the Eagles team, they're a top 8 quarterback, right? And I think that's the conversation that we need to have, where it's so different and so dependent on the situation. I don't think there's one team in this draft that's potentially drafting a quarterback that's going to be going to a situation like that. I don't think one of those teams has a need like that. One of those teams that has all the pieces, right? You're going to the Patriots. You're going to Washington. You're going to the Giants. Those teams have a lot of holes. I think you go to the Vikings, and maybe that's pretty promising. That might raise your floor for me, right? If Drake May ends up on the Vikings, I'm very excited about Drake May, and that's what I'm talking about. Like, I would take him in a heartbeat in that situation, because I think when you're throwing to Justin Jefferson's and Jordan Addison, and your offensive line is Christian Darrisaw on it, that's pretty good. Like, I want to take that risk on you, but it's so dependent on the situation, and that's why I'm saying, like, you asking me, is it a top 8 or a top 15? And I can't win with a top 15, but I can with a top 8. I don't know if that's really true, right? Because I think there are probably 6 quarterbacks in the NFL that have a legitimate chance of winning a Super Bowl right now. And that's it. There's 6.
Why are there only 6? Because
I think Patrick Mahomes is insanely special. I think Josh Allen is insanely special. I think Joe Burrow is insanely special. I think who else do I want? Lamar Jackson is insanely special. Look at how special Lamar is, and he can't win, right? Like, I think there are probably 3 guys that have a legitimate shot of winning a championship without having that team, right? Like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Patrick Mahomes are the only 3 quarterbacks that every single year are going to have a legitimate shot of winning a championship because of how good they are. Then there are probably 15 quarterbacks, and Lamar Jackson being in that tier, Trevor Lawrence being in that tier, Jordan Love, CJ Stroud being in that tier of the next guys that they need the team to be pretty good for them to make it to that spot, right? And I don't know if any of these guys are even there. I don't think Caleb Williams is in that conversation, right? Like, I think he falls in that second tier. He's not that top 3. No shot, right? He's more that second tier. He's going to be quarterback 4 to 15.
He's going to be between quarterback 2 and 7.
He's not. No, he's not. Not right away, and not on the Bears.
But Chris, here's
until they build that dome.
Everything you're saying, you can get a top 15 quarterback in the next class. If that's your baseline, you could do that next year. So build the team around him, and then get the quarterback in, and then use that rookie deal to add to that in free agency as well. And then you go hog wild. But if my second offensive tackle is Jermaine Illuminor, and then I'm relying on converted tackle failure Evan Neal to kick inside to guard to give me a semblance of a competent line, just so I could draft a JJ McCarthy or a Drake May, then what am I really building at that point? For that, I will take a top-end tackle.
Stop it. Name a receiver on the Giants that you would have as a top 30 NFL receiver. A top 30, 40 NFL receiver. Name one.
Okay, but then go
name
get
a top
one.
50. Name a top 60.
That's why that's why I'm doing my plan right now. You can get one in free agency or via trade. Brandon Ayuk is sitting there trying to get out of San Francisco right now. So that's what I'm saying. Build the team, then get the quarterback last, so you have that rookie contract throughout the window of those great players that you brought in before, and then you can bring in a wide receiver or whatever the hole is that you need to patch up with the money that you have, using that rookie quarterback contract advantage to then put the cherry on top and say, okay, we don't have, Pat Mahomes or Josh Allen or insert special quarterback top 5 here, but we got a squad, and that's going to be our avenue to try to win this thing.
Because if you're the Giants in this situation, right, you have the 6th pick. And if you're looking at my big board, I support them if Marvin Harrison, Joe Alt, or Malik Neighbors is there for them at 6. Those are the guys that they should take. But if you're at 6 and those guys are gone and it's May or Daniels, go ahead, go to the next slide. I'm taking those guys because like I talked about, if you out there listeners that listen to the receiver episode, I have Odunze in the same tier as Xavier Worthy. I don't think either of those players is changing your team. They make your team better. They do not change your team like the other guys do. So I'm not taking Odunze over one of those quarterbacks thinking that that's going to change my team, because I can take the quarterback at 6 and I could get a receiver. Some people are saying Worthy's going to be available in the second round. I'm taking him then, right? Like, I'd rather have quarterback at 6, Worthy at early second round, and do that than taking Odunze at 6 and then I have nothing at quarterback in the second round, right? Like, I just don't think that strategy makes a lot of sense to me.
You're going to have nothing somewhere important regardless this year. This is a multi-year thing. And so what I'm getting out of this, to bring this all back,
I don't think the Giants agree with you. I don't think they think this is a multi-year thing.
That is flawed, and that is why they're still not going to get any better.
But we didn't have our Giants episode. I really wanted to, but we didn't get to do it. And let's have a little mini one right now, okay? They have Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau. They have Dexter Lawrence. They drafted their corner last year. So on defense, all of the important positions that we say that you need to draft and you need to get right, they have on defense. They at least believe that. On offense, they have Andrew Thomas. They do not have a receiver and they do not have a quarterback. But those are the 3 positions on offense that you need to figure out before your team will be successful, right? We know that. So if you have the tackle, you have 2 picks that are extremely valuable picks in this draft. The first one's going to be quarterback or receiver, and the other one's going to be quarterback or receiver. And then your team is kind of filled out. I don't think the Giants think that they're that far away from winning, because they have those pieces on defense and they have the left tackle that it's really receiver and quarterback is all you need. If you inserted, just being transparent, right? If you inserted a top 15 receiver on the Giants and a top 15 quarterback on the Giants, is that really a bad football team?
Yeah. Yeah.
I disagree.
They're corners right now. You have Deonte Banks, okay, rookie last year. Okay, he's going to get better. Cordell Flott and Trey Hawkins. You still have
about how deep this draft is at corner. So in the 3rd, that's your drafted corner, and you have a number 2.
You better
corner.
pray DJ James is there, because otherwise, it's deep. But just like tackle, they have some guy named Aaron Stinney projected to start for them at left guard. Who is Aaron Stinney?
I don't know. I'm
sorry. They're handing the ball off to Devin Single, and I know running back, where running back don't matter. But if he's being blocked for by Aaron Stinney, John Runyon / Evan Neal on the interior, bro, they're not there. They're not.
We're gonna have this exercise. We're gonna do it. So if I'm the Giants, my mock draft for the Giants, right? It's Drake May at 6. In the second round, I'm going receiver, and let's just be conservative and say that I have to go with either Brian Thomas Jr., Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Ladd McConkey. Just give me one of them, right? So it's one of those receivers. It's Drake May. Then in the 3rd round, I still have an early 3rd round pick. You're giving me one of those corners. Maybe it's even Rakestraw Jr. is available in the 3rd round. It could be, right? And then in the 4th round, you're giving me Blake Corum, or you're giving me Jalen Wright, or you're giving me that's it. I'm good. And then I would in the 5th round, I would draft another receiver. I would draft Malachi Corley, because I think he's going to be there.
Malachi Corley is going to be gone by 9 p.m. Friday night.
But I'm just saying, that's how I think that's how a good, and we don't really talk about that enough, but it's really, when you have a good draft, a really good draft, you can transform a team that quickly. Seattle did it. The Browns almost did it last year, but then the quarterback got hurt. They still made the playoffs, right? Because they did it. They had such a good draft. When you have that team-changing draft, when you have the foundation of a good team and you add a good draft to it, that takes you to the next level.
Bro, I can't understand how Drake May, who you said is a 15% chance, less than 15% chance, probably half a 15% chance of being top 8 in his rookie year, when you just give him a 2nd round wide receiver and a 3rd round cornerback, is transforming this team. Because Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon and Aaron Stinney, or worst lineman in the NFL the last 2 years, Evan Neal, is going to block for this guy in his formative years. They're
like
too
I said,
far away.
I think the situation gets a lot better when you add legitimate receivers and a legitimate quarterback.
Yeah.
I
And
think
you
the
do
receivers.
that.
Go ahead.
You do that next year with the quarterback. You take,
Maybe.
first off, what they should do, honestly, I mean, it depends on how things shake out. And this goes for now, both all 22. So in all 22, if you have someone who likes Drake May and they want Drake May, for goodness sake, if you're not sold on him, trade down. Okay. That's what the Giants should do. But again, they probably just missed that window of teams that are trading up for quarterbacks. So they cannot trade down in this class. So I'm not going to do something unrealistic like that. But for heaven, it's been a decade. Your offensive line has been historically bad.
But you just keep throwing shots throwing crap at a wall and hoping it sticks. Like, you drafted 2 tackles in the top 8.
Neither of us really liked Evan Neal. We just thought, maybe he'll become something because look what they did with Andrew Thomas.
So, but they still did it.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, why are we so sure they're going to figure it out with the next guy?
Because we saw these guys. And we say, look, if Joe Alt is there, if Joe Alt doesn't go to the Chargers, that's your right tackle.
100%. I would take Joe Alt, but I have that in my rankings. I have that. We're agreeing on that.
Right. But what I'm saying is, okay, you don't get your quarterback, because if you don't take Joe Alt and you take your quarterback, you have, a rookie quarterback who you're counting on Jermaine Illuminor twice a year going up against Micah Parsons, and he's rushing your rookie quarterback. Have you seen Drake May handle pressure sometimes in the ACC? Yeah. If Micah Parsons is coming down on this guy, that you want to talk about stunting development. That's how you do it.
Let me just say, we stood here a year ago and I was furious with the Giants, because this is what cripples a team, right? Is when you have the opportunity to use a franchise tag on a quarterback that was tailor-made for the franchise tag, and you give him $150 million, right? If you do that with Daniel Jones, like the Giants did, it takes you away from being able to do something smart like the Texans did last year, which is, before you add your rookie quarterback, you spend every dollar that you have in the offseason upgrading your offensive line. We look at the Panthers. They realized that fast this offseason, right? And they added our 2 top guards of the offseason. They added both of them, right? They did that because they said, we should have had this in place before we drafted Bryce Young. It should have been here. The Giants keep making those mistakes, and that kills and cripples teams. That's why I don't think there's really a right answer, right? It's whether you go receiver or quarterback.
You just said the right answer. You just said it. Build the team.
You can't spend $50 million on a quarterback that's not good enough to have $50 million assigned to him and expect to figure it out. You're right. They're probably 2 years away no matter what. They probably are. And
they put themselves in this place.
Right. Exactly. So let's get off the Giants, because it's killing us. I think people understand where our differences are on these takes. I wanted to point out that we unintentionally, we didn't see each other's big boards until last night when you sent it to me. We both have 19 defensive players in our top 50 and 31 offensive players. You have 5 defensive interior, 4 edge, 2 linebackers, 7 corners, and 1 safety. I have 6 defensive interior, 6 edge rushers, 1 linebacker, 5 corners, and 1 safety. So we got there differently, but we ended up with both having 19 defensive players, which is pretty weird. On offense, you have 3 interior offensive linemen. I have 5. You have 9 offensive tackles. I have 7. You have 1 tight end. I also have 1. You have 12 receivers. I have 11. You have 1 running back. I have 1 running back. You have 5 quarterbacks. I have 6, Bo Nix being the differentiator. Pretty interesting that we ended up as close as we did. Again, not seeing each other's big boards. This is obviously a very offensively heavy rookie draft coming up, next week.
Yeah, it is. And I think even beyond that, I think it's the tiers in this class are pretty clear. Like, you have your elite guys, you have the no-brainer, you have the Caleb, the Marvin, the Malik, and then you have the offensive tackles that are projected to go in the top half of the first round. And then you kind of have the second group of tackles projected to go in the back half of the first, latest early second, but highly doubtful they get there. I feel like everything is, you kind of have these clear tier breaks between groups in this class. And that's why this numbers are similar when it comes to, okay, we have 21. And like I said, you throw Barton in there, there's 22 clear first round type of talents in this class. And then that's where the questions begin. I think this class is sort of very, I don't know the right word. It's just very clear as far as its delineations go. There's not a ton of gray area in the top 40-ish, 50-ish players in this class. And I think that's because it is so strong. And people say that, but I think it's very strong, just top heavy. I think once you get by top 75, top 85-ish players, I think it is a huge drop off. Where normally, I think in a standard draft class, people talk about top 100 picks always being like a premium pick. I like to normally stretch that around 110, 112-ish per class, I think is where it normally ends up. And in this class, I think it's more like 85 to 90 tops. So I think it is more sort of bunched up at the top, and that's likely because of COVID years in college football and players staying in college a bit longer. So I think everything has just kind of shifted towards the top end of the draft class, or the top half of the draft class, top third, most likely. And then from there, it's, if you miss that boat, you miss that boat. And that's just kind of how things just worked out, I think, just overall in this class. It's not weird. It's just very interesting to see it play out that way, because I think that the tier breaks are clear.
Did you know Daniel Jones hasn't thrown 20 touchdowns since his rookie year?
Oh my gosh.
I'm just
no,
like,
I didn't know that.
It kills me.
But he ran for like 15 or something, right? Like 1 year.
I couldn't care less.
I know.
Less. Anyway, yeah, you're right. Exactly. I think you're right about that, where the weight of this draft is. We are at an hour and 20 minutes. Do you want to keep going? We didn't do our how we differ from consensus. We're going to jump into that.
Oh yeah, of course. Let's do it. Let's keep going. This is the big board. We're less than a week from the draft. Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So I have reviewed my board. I hope that you've done the same. I've asked you to do that. Hopefully you did. Versus the consensus big board, right? So to say, if I didn't look at your stuff. If I have Ladd McConkey at 23, where does the consensus have him? So saying that, we have guys that we're higher on, we have guys that we're lower on. So let's do the guys we're lower on first. So for me, it was Jared Verse. I am 9 spots lower than the consensus. And I talked about how I could see that one biting me. That one scares me a little bit. Brock Bowers, the other guy I said could bite me. I am 11 spots lower than the consensus on Brock Bowers. Laiatu Latu, I am 13 points lower than the consensus. Tyler Guyton, 13 points lower. Brian Thomas Jr., I'm famous for not liking him. I am 16 spots lower than the consensus. Troy Franklin, I am 18 spots lower than the consensus. Terrion Arnold, 19 spots. And Adonai Mitchell, I am 22 spots lower than the consensus. I was surprised with Adonai Mitchell that I was that much lower than the consensus on him, because I do like him and I thought I had him pretty high. That's kind of mine. It's obviously I'm a little bit lower than the consensus on the receivers, even though I do really like them. Couple edge rushers, corner, tight end, tackle. Tyler Guyton, I feel very comfortable with where I have him considering what I saw on film. I think he's extremely raw, but obviously a team could take him. What are the guys that you were lower than the consensus on?
Surprise, surprise. JJ McCarthy, minus 19. You want to talk about that some more? No. Quinyon Mitchell, I had 24th. Consensus is at 12. That was my second biggest gap there. Jared Verse, I have at 22nd. Consensus with him is at 13. Cooper DeJean, I have at 29. Consensus is at 20. Terrion Arnold, I have at 19. Consensus at 11. And then after that, it's Keon Coleman. I have at 46, consensus at 39. So only -7 there. One thing to note, you mentioned Troy Franklin, so he wasn't in my list. So that means I'm even lower and have a bigger difference versus consensus than you do, right? Since he wasn't on mine at all at that point. So that's another name you can throw in there. And we talked about Quinyon Mitchell, how, again, the film sessions, like, I still kind of like this guy. You're 24, but why do you play like you're not as athletic as you are? That scares me. Are you just not a natural football player? I don't know. Jared Verse, you're a big fan of him. Again, with me, I kind of mentioned, I know I love the power, but how great does that power translate? I think it's just flavor of ice cream with wide receiver. I will say with Adonai Mitchell, there is a high bust potential there. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's pretty explosive, but that's one that is a higher bust factor than others in this class. And I could see that that's probably why you have such a difference from the consensus there, is because that's worrisome. And in a class this deep, why take that chance when you could go out and get Ricky Pearsall? So,
I totally messed that up.
Totally understand.
It was Quinyon Mitchell that the difference was. It was not Adonai Mitchell. So,
okay.
Quinyon
trying
Mitchell,
to give you flowers, but
I appreciate it. Quinyon Mitchell, I am much lower than the consensus. That was actually my biggest differentiator, with 22 spots lower. We talked about that as well, where I am definitely lower on him. I have him as an early second round pick. The consensus has him as potentially the first corner going off the board, which I think is kind of crazy. I highly disagree with that. So I guess, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's right. And it's for the concerns for those who, again, this might be your first episode and you're going, wow, these guys are talking quite a lot. We're an hour and 20 minutes in. Thank you. If you go back and watch our cornerback episode where we do a brief breakdown of Quinyon Mitchell, he opens the gate so early, unnecessarily, so often, and that's when he's playing against receivers from Illinois and Northern Illinois, and he's way more athletic than them. And when he's not simply carrying a route deep downfield easily because he's so fast, why is he giving up these windows underneath so easily? And that's a concern. Flip side, you go to the Senior Bowl, you put him in press man coverage, and he is an absolute stud. And on film, he hardly ever plays press coverage. They have him in off man or in cover 3, or a quarter, so often that you want to see more. You want them to really just allow him to be tested, and they don't do that. So if he goes somewhere and is in a press man type of system, and again, there's more zone and there's always varying coverages throughout defenses these days anyway. But if that becomes his forte, that could erase a lot of these issues that we have with him, and he could end up outperforming where we have him against the consensus. But as of today, when you just strictly look at the film, Quinyon Mitchell gives up way too many easy passes and makes it too easy on wide receivers for how much better than them he actually is. And I think that goes for both of us. Agreed.
Okay, give me the guys that you were higher on than the consensus.
All right, hold on. I gotta flip the sheet around. Let's see here. Blake Fisher, number 1. Consensus had him at 90. I had him at 49. Kyrie Jackson, they had at 91. I had at 50. So that's a difference of 41 spots. Michael Hall, we talked about already. I had at 43. Consensus at 69. Devondre Sweat, I have at 41. They have at 63. I think they might be factoring in some of the off-field stuff that's come up with him recently there as well when you add that to the weight issues. Tyler Nubin, I had 27. 46 is a consensus, so 19 spots there. Malachi Corley, I have at 42. They have at 59. Zach Frazier, 31. Meaning consensus is at 47. I'm going to name just the next 2 because I think that's a good one, or those are 2 good ones. Chop Robinson, of course, I have at 15. They have at 28. I have Jerzon Newton, 13th. They meaning consensus has him at 25 for a difference of 12 spots there. I feel like I didn't talk about Jerzon Newton enough. This is such a good damn football player. The more you watch, the more it's like, damn, this guy is so good. He is better than a lot of these names that people are throwing out in front of him. And is it just because he's not 300 pounds? I don't get it. I don't get it. Jerzon Newton is a damn good football player at pretty much everything. He's just not a one-tech anchor prototype guy. Otherwise, the guy finds himself 4 yards in the backfield using his power against guys much bigger than him. I don't understand how he's low on this consensus board. I really don't.
I think the trend I'm seeing on your board with the guys that you're higher on is you went for very valuable positions. Most of those guys you mentioned are tackles, corners, defensive interiors, right? It's very, very valuable positions that you said the consensus is too low on these guys. And I think the NFL is going to be much higher, or at least you're much higher. And again, if you play all 22, you're going to realize why, right? Like it makes sense for teams to gamble on guys like that than taking the extra running back in the 3rd round, right?
Or Junior Colson or something.
Or Junior Colson.
Ball backer. Yeah.
Right. 100%. I agree with that. Just side note, how much alcohol did Sweat drink? Didn't they say that he blew like 3 hours after he was driving and he was still like 3 times the legal limit? And he's 370 pounds. Do you know how much alcohol you'd have to consume to get 370 pounds, 3 times the limit, 3+ hours after he was done drinking?
Yeah, and it probably wasn't like first thing in the morning either. So we got some food in the system, probably Texas barbecue. Wow, what's that? What's that? It's like, yeah. I don't know, man. Texas varsity blues, like I'm forgetting the name now. This is what happens when I'm on the spot on the podcast. But like that, the kid that was drinking at the end there and like kind of shooting the old coaches, all his trophies. Billy Bob, like Billy Bob's a big dude. You know, it took him a lot to get to that point too. It had to take Sweat even more,
and then to drive,
which of course you know. Please call an Uber, everybody. Please call Ubers. It's 2024 or Lyft or whatever. Just don't drive after drinking. Please don't. But yeah, it's a concern. It's a concern. People already had concerns, or teams already had concerns because of the weight. When you add this in, and that was actually kind of a thing, was his maturity and being a partier. That was some of the scuttlebutt that was out there about T'Vondre Sweat. But you know, he's in college. He's in University of Texas. You'd be a partier. That's fine. But when it bleeds into something like this, and then it calls into question, well, then how serious are you about this stuff? Where we think ideally you should be maybe 340 and not 367 or whatever your actual weight is. And now you're going out and getting in trouble over this stuff. That's where teams start to question things and you really start to fall down board. So he might make it out of the second round. And I don't know, maybe even third. It depends on how deep people think this goes.
The Packers have 2 seconds and 2/3. If we don't take him in the third round, if he's there, I'm going to jump off the top of my building. I won't, but like, I'll be pretty upset.
Yeah, don't do that. But yeah, it's a concern. But for the purposes of my big board, right, without knowing the extent, I'm not going to assume it's the worst case as far as his stock goes. And so when I consider the trade and the just the tape that I see on film and what I think he can become in the NFL, it's why I didn't drop him too much, I guess you could say. Whereas again, consensus has him outside of the top 60 right now, and we'll see where it ultimately ends up in a week.
Okay. So just going to mine now, I have Kool-Aid 6 spots higher than the consensus. Chris Jenkins, defensive interior for Michigan, 7 spots above the consensus. I have Ladd McConkey, receiver out of Georgia, 8 spots above the consensus. I have Murphy, defensive interior from Texas, 10 spots above the consensus. I have his teammate Sweat that we were just talking about, 21 spots above the consensus. So again, I was much higher on him than others are. And I think Murphy's interesting to talk about too, just because I have him within my top 10. I actually have him as my #1 defensive player in this draft. Obviously, that's not consensus. I have him at 8. They obviously have him at around 18. I really like this guy. Like, I really, really like him. And I think there's going to be a ton of NFL teams that really, really like him. I would be shocked if he does not go top 12. I would be absolutely floored. But yeah, so those guys, I have the next 2 guys are very interesting, right? So we just talked about the Giants and what they did wrong. We talked about how the Panthers decided to correct the mistakes they made, right? And they paid 2 guards literally top level money and some of the top guard money ever given. I have Zach Frazier 21 spots above the consensus and Cooper Beebe 24 spots above the consensus. I think that teams are starting to wake up and say the interior of the offensive line is maybe not the most valuable in terms of impact on play, on the actual on-field outcome. But if I don't have it, there's a really good chance my quarterback is not going to be successful, which is the most important position on your team, right? The most valuable. Teams are obviously starting to pay, but it is so rare. When you play all 22, you're going to realize how slim those positions are, guard, center, how absolutely difficult it is to get a good one and to build your team deep at those positions. When you have guys that are, in my mind, surefire, legitimate starters, really high-end prospects for those positions, I'm going to be much higher than the consensus on it. I think Frazier is going to go in the first round. I really do. Will it happen? I don't know, but I very much think it could, because I think a lot of teams are waking up to that theory of, if I don't have this, my quarterback's not going to make it. And I need to make sure that happens. And if he doesn't go in the first round and you're the Giants in that second round, and we're talking about what their interior of their offensive line looks like, take this guy, right? Like it's teams like that should be eating it up if he's there for them. My number one guy difference from the consensus is Xavier Worthy. I am 27 spots higher. I think I have him, if you go up to the next one, I have him at 14, which means that the consensus has him at 35, which means, again, I was talking about how he might be a second round pick for somebody if the consensus is right, which the consensus is usually pretty spot on. And I have him as the same tier of receiver as Rome, who's going to be a top 10 pick. So I'm obviously much, much higher on Xavier Worthy. And I think any team that gets his hands on him is getting a fantastic football player. And in reality, I think that that's probably going to be one of the Bills or the Chiefs. And if you give either of those teams that player, so I'm sorry, it's just going to cause absolute havoc in the NFL.
What if he goes to the Dolphins?
Yeah, I mean, if the Dolphins do that, I'll just be super upset, because it's not, do you know, like the Joe Burrow meme of who's he going to throw to if he, but if he's going to get sacked.
You just argued about that for 15 minutes about the Giants. Yeah.
Right. But like, if the Dolphins do it, it's like your quarterback has like severe brain injuries because you're not protecting him. Why would you get another receiver and not build the interior offensive line? I just talked about how Zach Frazier and Cooper Beebe need to go earlier than expected because of a team like the Dolphins not protecting their quarterback. Yeah. Right.
I would just be surprised if I would not be surprised if Worthy is gone before both of those guys pick. I could see someone trading up for Worthy. They're going, this receiver class is deep, but we need speed. And this is the guy. Mm-hmm. And maybe they don't love Brian Thomas Jr. So that I could see that scenario taking place. There is a bit of a bust maybe not bust factor, but I worry a little bit, again, with the catching outside of his frame. He has some things to improve on that I think need to be cleaned up. So, but yeah, I think he's the type of prospect that one team loves, probably more than one team, but a select few love. One team does what it takes to make sure that they get him, and he goes higher than people think.
Yeah, I agree with you. So the consensus has him at 35. I think we've talked about this, but remember the drafts that CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy got drafted in, that great draft with Justin Jefferson, the first receiver taken was Henry Ruggs because of speed. Marquise Brown was drafted the same draft as AJ Brown and DK Metcalf, but he was the first receiver taken because of speed. Gosh. Teams do value speed and will take speed early. I don't think there's a bust factor in Worthy, but what I could see happening is that a team takes him to use him similarly to how Henry Ruggs was used, which is maybe he's not grading the best, maybe he's not having a ton of production, but what it does to open up your team by having that deep threat changes your team, right? The player's production might not be fantastic, but it changes almost every other aspect of your team and the way your offense functions, that it becomes valuable in itself to have that weapon on the field. I could very well see that happening. I don't see him being a bust.
Yeah. Bust factor is probably too strong.
Yeah.
But I agree with that take.
I don't have that.
You're shocked that I agree.
No. I'm saying I think we might be done.
I'll say one other thing. You're not at all crazy for having Byron Murphy that high up. I have him as my second defensive player, really. I love it. I think the NFL loves him.
Me too.
And it's going to be shown on draft night.
I am so excited for the middle of the first round of this draft because of guys like him. I think him, Fuanga, Faunau, Latham, Bowers, Verse, Mitchell, that is going to be such a fun group of NFL players to get drafted because they're all so dangerous. They all offer something to these teams that they're going to get drafted by that adds an element that teams die for. And in most drafts, those are top 10 picks. That's how good the top 10 of this draft is, that I think that the 10 to 20 you're getting in last year's draft, you're definitely getting a player just as good.
Oh yeah. 100%. It's a fun class.
We went on for almost 2 hours. I think it's time to hang it up. Everybody, thank you for tuning in and staying with us. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a lot of fun for us. We've been dying to do this one. And we will be doing our very first and final mock draft next week with a guest star. So I highly recommend you tune in to watch. It's going to be a ton of fun. But thank you for watching this one. If you haven't yet, please give us a follow on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter at all22_PFF, and give us a review wherever you watch or listen to your podcast, and have a great day.